From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel. This week, we are going to zoom in on one of those all-important races that will decide who controls the U.S. Senate next year. And to do that, joining me this week is Eric Hovde, the Republican candidate for the Wisconsin Senate seat. Born and raised in Madison, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and interesting to me, a fellow American of Norwegian background. Hello, Eric.
Great being on your podcast, Kim. And yes, fellow Norwegian. The Hovde farm literally is right outside of Oslo, Norway, at the head of a mountain.
Really? That's amazing. Yeah. We're in a little bit different place, my family, but we're going to try to avoid the Norwegian stereotype and not be shy and cold to each other on this show. Just to lay the scene here, Republicans, barring a meteor hitting the earth, are likely to win West Virginia. That gets Republicans to 50-50 in the Senate. They're doing very well in Montana, where Tim Sheehy could beat Jon Tester. And then there's a whole bevy of really close states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, but potentially none more tight than your state of Wisconsin, where polling shows that you have made some really big gains lately against sitting Senator Tammy Baldwin, and where the Cook Political Report just moved the race from lean Democrat to a toss-up. So tell us, what are you seeing internally in your own polling? What do you think the state of the race is right now?
It's a tied race. I mean, we had a poll that just came in that had us up one. We've seen others down one. It's within a 2-point margin of error, which means it's a jump ball. And I'll tell you that bodes very well for me because she's an incumbent. She's been in Washington for 26 years, 16 in Congress and then 12 in the Senate. And with the amount of people in this country feeling that the country's going in the wrong direction, typically people that break late tend to break for a challenger if they think the country's going in the wrong direction. So I'd much rather be in my spot than her spot, and the momentum is definitely on our side.
Do you guys know how many undecideds there are in Wisconsin? A rough estimate? Those late breakers potentially?
It's probably a number of around 3.5% right now. But there may be a little bit more flux into some of these numbers. What we're seeing happening in the Black community, particularly among young Black men, may bode very well for me. Also, the Hispanic population, they're definitely moving more in our direction. And one thing that we've actually also picked up is on college campuses. If you went back 2 years ago and certainly 4 years ago, overwhelmingly for Democrats, now that has changed, particularly with young males. So there's a lot in play here, but we feel really good about it. And look, when I started this race, I said, I'm not going to cede any territory to the Democrats. And I believe in President Reagan's broad tent strategy. You try to communicate with everybody and compete everywhere. And that's what we have done right from the get-go in this race. And it's going well.
Let me drill into that shift that we have seen, the tightening of the polls and that Cook Political Report rating. It's not as if the issues have changed. It's not as if your positions have changed or her positions have changed. So what do we think is accounting for this? Is it that people are finally paying attention to the race? Is there some issue that's come up that wasn't there before that's now resonating? Is it the money that's coming into the race? I saw that the Senate Leadership Fund announced $17 million to focus on your race in Wisconsin. What do you think is making for this close race now?
Well, first of all, I think the issues do matter, and I think they're starting to be formed for the public on where she stands versus where I stand. Look, Senator Baldwin's a chameleon. She runs back in our state outside of Madison, which is very progressively left where I live. She runs as who she is, a very progressive left candidate. But the rest of the state, she runs as this moderate candidate when she's far from that. So I think now that the rest of the state is getting to understand where she stands on a whole host of issues, supporting our open border, how she's voted on budget issues that have helped cause inflation, where she stands on social issues like pushing the changes to Title IX that, are pushing school boards to allow guys to compete in girls' sports or go into girls' bathrooms and locker rooms. Those kind of things are starting to come out, and I think that has really started to whittle away. When I first got into this race, there was about a 12% factor of Trump voters that were not supporting me, were supporting her. Now, part of that is they just didn't know who I was, and they had a different view on Senator Baldwin. Well, that number has now collapsed down to, 3%. And we hope it'll collapse all the way. So I think there's a variety of factors. At first, they had a lot more money. I've made a big investment. So I was in a better position than some of our Republican candidates to, be up on the air, but still not be able to match them. But I think people started seeing the difference between her and me, and it started driving my numbers up. And then because I was doing better, SLF and other organizations started to put more money in. So that's why I think this thing has closed so dramatically.
I want to dig into some of those issues in just a minute, but one more top line issue, because you mentioned it. As you noted, it's very difficult to unseat an incumbent. And at the same time, I'm looking at this race, and I think that this is a good comparison. I see some resemblances to the way Ron Johnson ran when he first ran in Wisconsin and became a senator there. And he did it by talking about the fact that he wasn't a lifer politician. You had mentioned that she's done this for about 30 years, elected office. You obviously come from business. When you talk to Wisconsinites, is that a strength against an incumbent? I know that they're also attempting to portray you as an out-of-state businessman, which is obviously ludicrous. You live in Wisconsin, you were born and raised in Wisconsin. But how does that play, that interplay between your casting her as a lifelong Washington politician and her trying to cast you as uncaring businessman who doesn't know what he'd do if he'd go to Washington?
I think it absolutely has a role, Kim. Look, people do not view career politicians favorably. People in our farming community, we have a huge manufacturing sector. In fact, us and Ohio are the two states with the highest percentage of employment in manufacturing. People are very skeptical of career politicians, and rightfully should be. And that's been one of the issues I've brought up from the beginning, because our country used to be governed by, and that's what our founding fathers wanted, was the citizen legislator, somebody who came from the real world, be it business, farming, doctors, to go to Washington to serve for a term or two, bring their skill sets, their knowledge, get things done, and return back to their communities. Sadly, since post-World War II, we've really developed this political class, which our founding fathers were trying to run from, the king and his court. So I think it resonates a lot with people. The view of Congress is so low. And as our country continues to fail, their constant infighting and not accomplishing anything, and the partisanship, I think people are just getting weared out from. So I actually think it actually plays a pretty significant role in why I have done so well.
That's a really interesting commentary on it, because sometimes I just wonder if it resonates. I know for a fact that some of my favorite senators of all time have come into Washington, and they did come from careers that had nothing to do with politics. And I do think there's a real merit to that. You guys have got a debate on Friday night. Is that correct? 7 p.m.?
That is correct. She's ran from all debates. If you went back 60 years in our country, Senate candidates would probably debate a dozen times all over our state. And then for the last, certainly 30, 40 years, you'd have 3-4 debates, each one running typically an hour and a half. She's only allowed one debate on a Friday night at 7 p.m. I don't think many people will be watching. They'll probably having drinks and, having dinner. But we get one debate for 1 hour, but I can't wait for it. It's at least going to be the first time that we'll be able to talk about issues side by side and let the people of Wisconsin see where she stands versus me.
Well, on that, what's the one issue in this debate that you would like to make the race most about? And what's the one issue of this debate that you think she'll try to make this race most about?
Well, I'm going to try to make it about the issues that matter most. First and foremost, the economy and the destruction that they've done with all the deficit spending that has us now with $36 trillion in debt and interest costs of $1 trillion a year on that debt, which is what ignited inflation. Obviously, the open border, but there's so many different issues that I want to get into. What she's going to want to do is try to confuse. Her whole campaign has kind of been like a flim-flam act, saying I'm a Californian because I bought a business out in California. I've had businesses all over the place, saying all these crazy things like I think farmers are lazy. Never said that in my life. I want to take away Social Security. Never said that in my life. I want to have a federal abortion ban. I'm opposed to a federal abortion ban. So her whole campaign has been about lies. She's doing that because she's trying to distract from her failure on almost everything and the fact that she pretty much lives in New York with her Wall Street partner. And what's so ironic about it, she made a brand of herself running against Wall Street and big pharma and big tech, and yet pretty much lives on Wall Street, takes a ton of money from Wall Street, big pharma, and big tech. So look, she's a hypocrite. So she's not going to want to get into the issues, and she's just going to want to try to confuse and get out of there in an hour's time.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, more with Eric Hovde, the Republican candidate for the Senate in Wisconsin. Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel here with Eric Hovde. Let me ask you, she is going to talk about abortion. Obviously, Democrats have been using that issue pretty successfully for themselves since 2022 and the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs. And I want to ask you more about how you're handling it. Obviously, she's trying to distort your record. You talked about the federal abortion ban. You're not in favor of that. I believe you have said that women in early stages of pregnancy should be able to choose. I believe you're on record saying that Wisconsin should make these decisions for their state in our Dobbs world that we're in right now. But I'm more interested in your approach to handling this question, because what Republicans have done in recent years is kind of run from it. And I think we're seeing a change this year where Republicans are trying to actually engage on this and make sure their views are known. How have you approached this issue, given the onslaught and the focus from the Democratic side on it?
Oh, look, I expressed my views right from the get-go, put out video, did some digital marketing around it. Now they've spent an inordinate amount of money trying to attack and distort where my views are. I mean, look, my views have been very clear. Roe v. Wade was overturned for a legal reason because courts are not supposed to make law. And that's why it fundamentally got overturned. And it's up for a legislative body or the people to make law and the courts to interpret that law. So it's been put back to our states. I think the state of Wisconsin should, through a referendum, find a common sense, compassionate approach to this issue. I believe in the beauty of life because I have two daughters, but I also agree with exceptions for rape, incest, and the health of the mother, and that a woman should have a right to decide early on in their pregnancy. Where I draw a line is that I think it's fundamentally unconscionable to terminate a baby that can be born healthy and alive. And where I am is where the majority of the American public is. Now, they're going to spend money after money, which they're doing every week, trying to distort where I stand on this issue. Actually, I think they're going to waste more money because we will be coming up here literally in the next couple days and hammering back of saying very clearly where my position is. So I hope the people of the state resonate well with it and see that it's just another lie that she is engaged in.
Another big topic, obviously, is immigration. And I would love for you to tell me what you're seeing on the ground in Wisconsin, because we had that debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And then we had all the media racing after his comments about Springfield, Ohio, and the truth or the not truth and the fact checkers. But to me, in my mind, what it seemed to happen in that debate is that it raised the question of stress on communities from migrants who have been moved into. So whatever the specifics in each particular community, it managed to create as a bigger topic this question of the pressure that's been put on social services and school districts and police resources as we've had this huge influx of people that have moved across the country into different states. What's that situation been like in Wisconsin, and where would you say that issue is in terms of voter priorities?
It's the second biggest issue because every state is now a border state. Whether, the number is 10 million, which that's way on the low side, or 16 to 20 million illegal immigrants that have come into our country, it is, I call it the rotten onion. And the reason why I use that term is because an onion has many layers to it. So let's unpeel the layers. First of all, you're compounding the housing affordability problem and the access to healthcare. both real problems for Americans today. When you pour all these people into our country, they're using housing and they're using healthcare, putting even greater strains on the system. And by the way, the Democrats don't understand there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if all these illegals are using our healthcare system and not paying for it, that cost gets transferred to Americans who are using our healthcare system through higher health insurance costs or higher medical costs. So that's the first issue. The second issue is the crime issue. We've had some horrible incidences in our state. Most recently, a few weeks ago, a mother and her daughter brutally raped in a small town of 5,000, Prairie du Chien, by a Venezuelan gang member. But we've had multiple incidences of crime that have occurred. Probably the biggest issue is the fentanyl crisis. We lost 108,000 Americans last year, 112,000 the year before. It's the number one leading cause of death of 18 to 45-year-olds. This poison's produced in China, sent to the drug cartels in Mexico, and brought up over our open southern border. And every community has felt that. And then lastly, they've created a humanitarian crisis. I've had my foundation fighting against sex trafficking, both in this country and around the world. I have Hovde homes all over the world caring for abandoned children and pulling children out of the sex trade. And they can't account for such a huge amount of children. And sadly, a lot of those children have ended up in the sex trade. So at almost every single level, this has been devastating. They dropped 1,000 illegal immigrants in a town called Whitewater of 13,000 people. The budget went upside down overnight. Schooling became a problem. Healthcare has become a problem, and housing has been exacerbated. So it has been a very negative effect for our state.
You know, when you raise all these issues, immigration, inflation, people's insecurity over international relations or feeling that things are spiraling out of control, gas prices, crime, it would seem that Republicans should be winning these races in a landslide. In fact, you know, if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, only about 29% of the country thinks we are on the right track. What do you think accounts for the fact that these races are so close? Is it the top of the ticket? Is it polarization? I just feel like I think if we were however many years ago and you had a kind of similar situation when Carter was challenged by Reagan and that race was a landslide, we're not seeing that this time. What do you think accounts for that?
Oh, I think the most obvious one is the mainstream media. They are not even remotely fair and balanced. In 1980, the most respected man in America was Walter Cronkite, a journalist. And why was he so well respected? Because he delivered the news, totally balanced, never put his thumb on the scale, just gave you the facts. Today, the mainstream media is so one-sided. If I made up ads and lied as aggressively as she has, if I did that against her, the newspapers would be calling me out, the media would be hitting me, and yet she gets away with it. So, they've created this narrative that has turned Donald Trump into the devil. If you're watching ABC, NBC, CBS, and certainly CNN or MSNBC. So I think that's a big part of it, the way big tech manipulates things. Thank God for Elon Musk, because a lot of the stories wouldn't even be coming out if he wouldn't have bought Twitter. But I think that the media and how they have become nothing but a propaganda tool for the left. So I think that's the big issue. Also, they raise an enormous amount of money. They've had a big money advantage in most races. And they, again, get a lot of money out of big tech and other industries. So I think those are the big factors.
We're going to take one more break. When we come back, more on the Wisconsin Senate race.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome back. I am Kim Strassel here with Eric Hovde, the Republican candidate for the Wisconsin Senate seat. How much of your race do you think, your outcome in your race is going to be tied to Donald Trump's performance in the state? It's interesting. Some of the polling suggests that you are one of the rare candidates out there who is actually keeping polling pace with him. That's been an interesting phenomenon among other races, is that Republican candidates in some states have been underpolling his position in the state. How much ticket splitting do you think there will be in Wisconsin? And again, how much does this relate to the top of the ticket's performance?
Look, there's no question the top of the ticket is going to have a big influence on my race. We're getting about 97% of Trump voters. I'm off right now about 3% of Trump voters. That was a much higher number. But I'm also picking up voters that President Trump isn't getting. So Wisconsin's a total purple state, but we're a center-right state. 6 of our 8 congressional seats are Republican. Our state Senate's a supermajority Republican, and our assembly's almost a supermajority Republican. So if you look at 2020, there were 50,000 voters that tend to vote Republican that didn't vote for President Trump. Now, I think he's picked up some of those this time around, and I think he's brought a whole bunch of new people coming in his way. So I think President Trump is winning the state right now. I'm pretty confident on that. But, there's a group of voters that, for whatever reason, don't support President Trump that I think are looking at me and voting for me. So I think at the end of the day, we'll probably end up relatively in the same spot. I'll lose a very small percentage of voters that he will get, and I'll pick up a very small percentage of voters that he won't get. But, pretty much we're going to be locked in with each other.
Well, that's one more question I have is what are you seeing when you look out there about Republican get out the vote efforts? I'm fascinated. I would like to hear your thoughts on this because if you read the press right now, there's a lot of talk about how Republican National Committee is outsourced a little bit of this to some outside groups, Turning Point Action, this super PAC aligned with Elon Musk, and the targeting of low propensity voters. And you have some Republicans who say along this path lies electoral gold. You have other Republicans saying, oh my gosh, this could be a disaster. How do you think that's going out there on the ground in a state like Wisconsin?
Look, a lot of the state parties are just not as functional as they used to be, and ours is certainly one of them. And by the way, the Democrats, if you really look at it, even though their state party may be a little bit more functional, what happened with the Democrat machine is they have all these other groups that are run by more business-oriented people that do get out the vote, do digital targeting, all the rest. So I think the infrastructure is being built around Republican candidates to do the same. So I think it's a positive. Clearly, there's a group backed by Elon Musk that's in our state. AFP, I think, is having a role, Turning Point. So, and don't get me wrong, I'll be on the call with all the party chairmen of our different counties. I'm asking them, make sure you're working your base is hard. So look, I'm not walking away from our party, but I'm also welcoming new participants in for my race. The left has always got an inherent benefit because think of who are the people that vote for the Democrats. Public employees. That's probably the biggest weight. And a lot of public employees have already organizations, unions, and all the rest. And so they're natural to go out and do that. Where most Republicans are private sector employees. So it's a little less organized. So I'm welcoming some of these parties coming in and participating to try to get out the vote.
Well, the collapse of state parties, that is something that I will have to have you come back on. We could talk about for an hour. I find fascinating, but we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking your time with us today and let us know how things go in the race.
Kim, wonderful being on your podcast, another fellow Norwegian, and on to victory in November.
Thank you, Mr. Hovde. Thank you to all of our listeners. We are here every week. If you are enjoying the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to us, you can reach us at pwpodcast@wsj.com.